Riesenberge ab. Ihr kindergüt'gen Tursen wild oft droht, ein Zwerglein ich dem Sonnen Sehnsucht hob, in Einsamkeit aus überwundener Not.
Who the fuck is that? It's your mom. Are you really my mom? No, just joking.
How do you like that? French death metal band Suppuration in the intro. Really good stuff. But we're not talking about French death metal this week. Instead, we're talking about more death metal from the Netherlands.
Now we have this going on again.
When it comes to Dutch death metal, the originators are undoubtedly Pestilence, but then when you get into the golden age of death metal in the early 90s, I would say the Dutch sub-scene of that is typified by three bands. The first one is Asphyx, who hopefully we now all know and love, given that I've spent almost an hour talking about them. The second one would be Sinister, who are very fast, technical, and chaotic, almost rather American sounding compared to the more European classical strains of Asphyx. And then we have the subject of episode 155 of this program, Gorefest. So what's the deal with Gorefest, you might ask? Well, if you would know a man, look to the company that he keeps. I used to write reviews back when I was a teenager for a Swedish metal webzine. This webzine had a forum on which a whole lot of different people would post, including famous Gorefest drummer Ed Warby. As far as the unholy trinity of Dutch death metal goes, well, he was in a band with the guys from Asphyx for years. And one time I was talking about Sinister, and he basically said, "God damn, I hate that band. I can't stand that kind of death metal." And I was just freaking the fuck out. Big time why are mommy and daddy fighting moment. Nowadays, however, I have become more mature and I can see where he's coming from. So he likes Asphyx and he can't stand the very chaotic American, like Floridian death metal strains of Sinister. So that should give you an idea of where Gorefest is coming from. They are not going to be playing your sort of standard death metal. It's going to be a lot closer to kind of like normal sounding music. So to get into Gorefest, we got to go way back in time before Ed Warby was in the band, back into the 80s.
It's the 80s, do a lot of coke and vote for Ronald Reagan.
To a time when Gorefest were quite a bit farther from normal sounding music, and paradoxically they got to that position by playing some very normal sounding death metal on their demos. There are two of those. They are entitled Tangled in Gore and the wonderfully titled Horrors in a Retarded Mind, which I am assuming goes a little something like this. Sure smells like 80s death metal in here. Like if you like Morgoth, you like early death, you like Carcass in the 80s, you'll probably be okay with early Gorefest because it just kind of sounds like all of those. Maybe a little bit darker, maybe a little bit nastier, but overall, and I'm gonna get a lot of hate for saying this, those two demos and the first Gorefest album, Mind Loss, I'm not a big fan of them. It might just be because I heard their second album way before I heard their early stuff, so that debut just doesn't have the same impact on me. The first album there, Mind Loss, it suffers from what one might term Dutch death metal debut syndrome, DDDS, in that it's like all songs from the demo and then like one new song. Same thing as the first Asphyx album and the first Acrosticon album. But with those early Asphyx and Acrosticon efforts, the new production in a professional studio really helped bring out like the amazing qualities of their older songs. With Gorefest, a lot of people say that their demos sound better than the debut album. I don't really care for either of them, whatever, but there are parts of that first Gorefest album that I enjoy because they sort of are prescient of where they would go later on. For instance, this song, Confessions of a Serial Killer, shows their standard method of composition later on, where they have chug riffs leading into little melodic slidey parts. I dig that. It's, it's not amazing on this song, although they did bring it back a lot to their live sets later on because it sounds like later Gorefest. But it's an interesting idea, and once you get to their second album, False, they are going to take that idea and run with it. This kind of like you chug, then you do some kind of melodic fill, then you go back to the chug. Very simple idea, but it's a lot more progressive, and it has more potential than the standard sort of blasty death metal of the era. So for that second album, the first thing you notice when you pick it up, it's got a really cool cover. It's this weird sort of like hybrid of collage and painting. Like this man is painting a bulletin board collage of various like gore and guns and religious symbols. Really cool stuff. His name is Robert Middleton. He is from the band Deviated Instinct, and he painted all the Deviated Instinct album covers. He did all of the early Napalm Death album covers, and he did the first Discordance Axis album cover. I enjoy all of those, but I think his best work actually was done with Gorefest. So you got a cool cover. You have a much more professional sounding production from Colin Richardson, who you've heard on basically fucking everything, I'm sure. Bolt Thrower, Massacre, all that good stuff. Yeah, and Machine Head. But don't you worry, there's gonna be a weird thing going on with Machine Head in the Gorefest career later on. We'll get to that when it happens. But for this album, they also had 2 new secret weapons because they got rid of their original lead guitarist, Alex Von Shake, and they got rid of their original drummer, Mark Hugendern. Instead, we have a character on the drums who I would compare to something of a Dan Swano type, in that he doesn't really come from a death metal background. He's more of a prog rock, kind of epic heavy metal, melodic power metal sort of guy that had an appreciation for death metal and then kind of came into the genre later on. In fact, this man has collaborated with Dan Swano several times in the past. His name is Ed Warby. At this time, he was with a band called Elegy, who played some really cool kind of progressive power metal back in the early 90s. It was actually sort of a little mini scene in the Netherlands at the time with bands like Elegy right here, Defender, and Jewel. But you hear all this like weird like tom rolls and shit that he was doing. Well, you take that kind of shit, you bring it into Gorefest, you get really, really technical, interesting stuff, like this song, From Ignorance to Oblivion. This actually isn't off of the False album. Instead, this is a live recording from them playing, I want to say Dynamo Festival in Eindhoven. But it's an interesting live recording because Ed Warby had just had like some pretty serious like hand and arm surgery like the week before that show, and he had like a big old hole in his arm at the base of his thumb, and he was still playing shit like that, so you know that guy's a serious musician. Speaking of wacky Gorefest live occurrences, around this time they were touring Europe with Deicide, and they had a bit of a bomb scare at one of their gigs, which led to the eminently quotable line from Jan Chris de Kuijer, the vocalist and bassist's mother, who read about this bomb attack or bomb threat. It didn't actually go off in a newspaper, and then she says Gorefest won't stop because of a little bomb, and goes back to scrambling her eggs for breakfast. Because Gorefest is fucking tough. They don't mess around. But this is like a really weird occurrence because I've seen this mentioned all over the place, including the False booklet, but not from the mouths of Gorefest themselves, that this bomb was planted by crazed Norwegian black metal boogeymen who were mad at Glenn Benton for being a fake Satanist, or possibly wacky neo-Nazis who were mad at Gorefest for their left-of-center lyrical content. This is demonstrably false. In fact, there is a book written by Michael Moynihan, who might be famous to some of you for compiling the issues of a political magazine from the 80s and entitling it Siege. But he also put out this book called Lords of Chaos that is rather controversial. My personal opinion, the chapters about Hendrik Mulbus from Absurd are actually pretty good. The Varg chapters not so much, but he did include something about this supposed black metal neo-Nazi terrorist attack. He found a letter sent before the gig happened, the actual bomb threat letter, which was from a radical left-wing eco-terrorist type unit called Animal Militia, threatening Glenn Benton for sacrificing animals to Satan. So that's what actually happened. Don't listen to anybody else. But anyways, fucking Gorefest. False. I mentioned they had 2 secret weapons. Not only do they have Ed Warby, they also have a man named Baldevane Bonebacher, which is an awesome name. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. I'm a stupid American piece of shit.
Hey Bobby, look, I'm American. I think I'll use my credit card. Do you guys have anything non-dairy? Anything gluten-free?
But yeah, they got that guy on lead guitar now. And combining that with a much more unique sense of songwriting, you get one of the best death metal albums of all time, in my opinion. And in the opinion of Seiji from Intense Balism. who can be seen wearing a shirt depicting this album at many different live gigs. If it's good enough for the intestine Balism guy, it's good enough for you. Great combination of chugs and tremolo riffs, and then watch how they utilize negative space right here. Hit those 3 or 4 chords, then let it ring out. Give you some nice space for Ed Warby to hit some dank double bass fills. Speed it up! See, just really interesting songwriting. You can take these very simple riffs, but if you play them with different tempos and kind of different right-hand techniques, you can get a whole lot out of it. Very catchy stuff. But didn't I say there was some great lead guitar here? There it is. Okay, this guy, he is the best. This solo right here, it stitches like the whole second half of the song together. It kind of like porpoises up and over and down and around, like orbits this like weird drone note that they're doing. And I fucking love it. This part right here is really cool, this little descending figure. It goes way down under the music and then it climbs back up slowly only to descend again. This whole solo right here, I almost hesitate to call it a solo because it's so well thought out and it has all these repeated sections. It's just like an extra layer of riffs. Dig the shit out of this album, man. We also have cool slower songs like the title track where they utilize these hanging chords in conjunction with some very loud, prominent bass guitar. Almost kind of like a death metal version of Godflesh, and you know I love me some Godflesh. Dank bass tone right there. But yeah, these like layers of harmony and noise coupled with that nasty rhythm guitar sound. This is really, really good stuff. I cannot recommend it enough. And then here we get into a pretty dank riff. Nice little ascending melodic figure. Also, I think JC, Jan Chris, JC most people call him, really stepped up his vocals for this album. He has a very unique style, very understandable words, and overall he's distinguished from a lot of other death metal vocalists. Cool little counterpoint bit to that initial groove riff, utilizing a lot of harmonies. This is almost sort of like a proto-melodic death metal album in a lot of ways. Interesting extrapolation of like Necroticism era Carcass. In fact, I like this more than I like Necroticism. And I know that's pretty blasphemous, but you know, I still like Necroticism. I just think this is cooler. It's so good. Nice little ascending melodies right here. Good stuff. So yeah, False, pretty much universally considered a death metal classic by most people. However, then we get to the third Gorefest album. They encountered some trouble. This is where Machine Head comes in. You remember that? Of course you do. You're smart. Anyways, they were all set to record with Colin Richardson again, but then he bailed on them. They didn't know why. Turns out it was to record the first Machine Head album. Yikes. Not a fan of Machine Head, but the specter of Machine Head looms over this album in more ways than one because a lot of people accuse it of being a Pantera or even like Korn-style groove metal album. I first encountered this album because I bought False. It was a 2 CD set and it came with Erase. I put it on and was not a fan of it. Did not like what I first heard of it. So I kind of ignored it for years and years. But eventually, you know, I got into my mid-20s. It was a rainy day. I pulled this album out and turns out it's actually a really interesting follow-up to False. There is that new emphasis on groove, but that just means they have more opportunities to utilize their great sense of rhythmic complexity, which gives you really fucking weird sections like this, coming out of like very thuggish grooves into this like abstract kind of floaty shit. I don't know, I dig the shit out of this album actually. It might be my favorite Gorefest album. Certainly tied with False, both really good. Like, how can you not like this? This is fucking great. It's like weird bendy riffs and shit. Nice little arpeggios in the background here. The vocals are still great. And yeah, it's more groove influenced, but like I said earlier, that just means they get to do more interesting rhythmic shit, which was always their strength as a band. Also little bits of acoustic guitar showing up every now and then. But then in like other songs on this album, You get a lot of really frenzied, fast shit. This is one of the best songs of the album. It's entitled Piece of Paper, but peace is spelled like world peace, you know?
This is a real mess.
Yeah, these like weird melodic thrashy bits are all over the place. Dig the hell out of those. Great songwriting. Even when they do a groove riff, if my younger years had paid attention, the groove riff will have like multiple layers of like weird harmonies. There's just so much to hear. In fact, Boudevane described this album as very much being a musician's album because of that. Also, this transition is great, and how do you fucking like that? That's brutal as shit. I dig the fuck out of that. I love how it's not even a straight blast. He like hits a full stop in the middle of it and then immediately jumps back into blasting. I can feel my fucking quads cramping up just listening to that. Yikes. But yeah, no, Erase, great fucking album. Go and give it another chance if you didn't like it the first time you heard it. And then we get to later Gorefest. A long time ago I did an episode on Perpetual Demise. Their sole full-length album, Arctic, I actually think is a better version of a follow-up to the second and third Gorefest albums than what Gorefest themselves put out. So just go listen to Perpetual Demise instead. Hey, when'd you change into BDUs? Where the hell did you get that megaphone from?
You have lost this war, GI. Your army will leave you behind.
You can't make me talk about later Gorefest. I won't do it.
You cannot dig foxhole to hide in, G.I. Joe. Your bombers will find you.
But I don't like those. I like Gorefest. I don't want to talk about the Gorefest albums I don't like. Ugh.
GI, your helicopters fall from the sky like broken birds.
Why are you so mean all the time? Okay, look, if you really want me to, I'll talk about the goddamn later Gorefest albums, but I did not enjoy Soul Survivor. Here's why. Okay, this is what I think most people hear when they say they don't like Erase. They might be thinking of this album, because this is terrible. It's these like dumb groove rock riffs, and then JC sounds like a goddamn cartoon character trying to sing and do death metal vocals at the same time. I really don't like this album, and from what I can tell, at least from talking to Ed Warby in the past, the band themselves were not having a fun time doing this. They all wanted to pull the band in different directions, and it just led to this absolute mess of a record. The follow-up was a little bit better. It's still not awesome, but at least they're not trying to be as sing-songy. That said, Chapter 13 still has nothing on Erase or False. In fact, as much as I don't like the Gorefest debut album, I like it a hell of a lot more than I like this stuff. It's just, I don't know. Like, listen to this. Do people like this? I don't like it. And, Ed Warby didn't like it either. And the band broke up. That's it. That's it for Gorefest. Ed Warby goes on to play with the prog metal band Irion. Eventually joins up with Martin Van Drunen for Hail of Bullets. But wait, in the midst of that all happening, Gorefest actually does come back. And they put out two great albums entitled La Muerte and Rise to Ruin. This is the second one, Rise to Ruin. I like it a little bit better, but they're both good. It's kind of an interesting combination of the first three Gorefest albums. It still has the melody and weirdness of the second and third albums, but they bring back way more kind of blasty death metal stuff from their early era shit, and I enjoyed both of those albums. And then the band broke up again. I think Ed Warby and it might have been JC said, we did everything we wanted to do with this band and we decided to break it up before it got lame. And given what happened when the band went on a little bit too long the first time around, they probably made the right decision. Anyway, that's Gorefest. Check them out. They're great, and I'll see you next week.
Nothing wrong with Chinese people. Please don't find this video offensive. Don't. If you're Chinese, I love you. I love you. Please don't click that mouse and exit the video. I like Chinese food. I love anime. Okay, anime where it's called. And wait, that's Japan.